Hello everyone, what is up? It is me, AlbyMTG, and for today's video we'll be talking about how Turbo Fog managed to become Tier 1 in Standard. This is the kind of deck that, your new player to Magic shows up with at their FNM and then just kind of doesn't do too well, or maybe does, middle of the pack, but it's the kind of deck that they really have a lot of fun playing. Maybe it's kind of annoying to play against at times, but the person playing it really has fun playing it. And Turbo Fog is a deck that's always kind of existed ever since the first ever Fog card was printed. Fog, of course, being 1 green mana for an instant that says prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. And it's always just been kind of an interesting little deck that we have, sort of like Mill, how some people like alternative win conditions and different ways to play. It's just always a deck that's been around, but we're finally at the point where Turbo Fog has become Tier 1 in Standard. It's seeing play at the Pro Tour. If you think I'm joking and that Turbo Fog is still not a real deck, let's go ahead and take a look at this picture here. This one, credit to Saffron Olive for taking the screenshot here. This is during round 8 of the Pro Tour, which is happening right now, and you can see David Williams here is on the right-hand side, and I apologize to whoever Cochran is. I don't know your first name, but David Williams is the person on the right-hand side with all the permanents in play. You can see a Teferi emblem, a Teferi, a Karn, 2 Karn constructs, a bunch of lands. The City's Blessing is down there. He's got some energy. Meanwhile, his opponent has absolutely nothing in play. This is not a joke. His opponent has 0 permanents in play compared to David Williams having literally a million permanents, and it was quite the sight to see. I definitely recommend going back and watching round 8 again if you're interested to see this deck in action. So it's very interesting to me to see this kind of a deck coming up and doing well at the Pro Tour, and doing well enough that it gave us this beautiful moment here of one person with a million permanents in play and their opponent, despite having a larger life total. His opponent is at 18 and he's only at 11, but the number of permanents that David has compared to his opponent is quite the big difference. So we're going to be talking about how this deck managed to become a thing. So first off, we'll go ahead and take a look at the deck list. This was originally from Tetsubo, I would assume is how this is pronounced. He went 5-0 with this in a standard competitive league on not April, wow, that is a few months behind, on August 2nd. It is currently August 4th, close enough. I don't know what day it is apparently. So 2 days ago he came up with this list, which was before the submission of decks for decks to be played in the Pro Tour. I believe deck submission was on the 3rd, or actually no, the 2nd would have been the day that decks needed to be submitted. So maybe this person had already submitted their deck and then played this, or maybe the information came out right before deck lists were fully announced. But this list is just super cool. It has a lot of powerful planeswalkers in it. We're talking about Karn, which of course is fantastic, Teferi, which is fantastic as well. It's playing Karn's Temporal Sundering, which is another way of taking an extra turn, because you can control a planeswalker or any other legendary, but Karn and Teferi are the main ways that you'll be using this Karn's Temporal Sundering. And what really makes this deck insane is 4 copies of the Buy a Box promo Nexus of Fate. This is something people were extremely worried about before Nexus of Fate got printed, when Fire Speaker or Sunsong and Fire Speaker, whatever that card is, people were like, man, if this ends up being in any sort of deck, it's just going to be $1 million. And then it was still $1 million, even though it wasn't in any good decks. And the Nexus of Fate comes along, and they're like, this is actually a good card, it's going to be $1 million. And now we're seeing it here on the Pro Tour being played as a 4 of. And it's kind of interesting. It only took 2 sets for Buy a Box promos to become something to worry about. A lot of people are pretty scared about what may happen to the price of Nexus of Fate or to Buy a Box promos to come in the future. So it is just kind of a little interesting thing. And of course, the 2 fogs that we have here in the deck are Haze of Pollen, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn, and then has cycling. And then the new one from M19 here, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn, here with a Root Snare. So it's just a very interesting deck, and we want to talk about how Turbo Fog managed to become Tier 1. So when we take a look at the standard metagame, what most of the pros were expecting for this Pro Tour was these top 3 decks. A lot of people would be on them: Grixis midrange, Mono Green Stompy, Red Black aggro. Red-black aggro has essentially no game against a fog effect, especially a deck that's running 8 fog effects. You can just go to a relatively low life total and then just fog yourself until it's a fairy takes over the game, and you can start taking extra turns. Grixis midrange, these decks really don't play a lot of counterspells in Game 1. In Game 1, here, this sample deck list we're looking at took first place at the SCG Classic in Philadelphia here. The only way that it has of dealing with spells like the fogs or the take extra turn cards are Supreme Wills or Commit to Memories, and then there's one Torrential Gear Hulk here as well to flash these back. So really, like, these decks just aren't playing a ton of counterspells. I'm sure the matchup against blue-white control isn't great, but blue-white control is also just kind of trying to play Teferis, and you're trying to play Teferis, and you can end up winning the games with just Planeswalkers because Planeswalkers are quite good against control decks. But when we look at these top 3 decks that people were expecting to see in Standard for this Pro Tour, the 3 decks just have a hard time beating Fog. And of course, because the metagames are the way metagames are, and Magic players are kind of trained to learn metagames and look at the top decks in a metagame, and we're seeing all these decks that just aren't great against Turbo Fog. And then meanwhile, if we come here to view more, we're seeing 12% red-black aggro decks, 12% Grixis midrange, 10% mono-green Stompy, and then we come down here to this one, and you can see here at a measly 0.8% of the meta is this nice little Turbo Fog deck that has fantastic game against these top 3 decks. So again, right now Nexus of Fate at about $37.50. Who really knows what's going to end up happening with this after the Pro Tour? If it ends up winning the Pro Tour, we're going to probably see, like, I don't even want to know what happens if this card ends up winning the Pro Tour, but it'll definitely be interesting to see nonetheless. But this is just, I find it very cool that Turbo Fog has become a Tier 1 deck here on the Pro Tour. I think it's very cool, very interesting, and just very fun to see it there. But at the same time, it is a little bit worrisome because of the Nexus of Fates. A lot of people have some doubts and some worries about buy a box promos like Firesong and Sunspeaker and Nexus of Fate being done the way that they were. But really, aside from that, I think it's just kind of interesting to see that it's here. Again, you can see how the standard metagame led us to this point where Turbo Fog is playable. All these decks are just focused on aggro, playing creatures, killing you with creatures relatively quickly, and the Fogs are just able to keep you alive long enough until your Planeswalkers like Karn and Teferi can take over the game, and then you can start taking additional turns with Nexus of Fate and Karn's Temporal Sundering. Of course, I hope you guys did enjoy the video. This was my first video back from vacation, so hopefully you guys did enjoy it. Of course, there will be more content to come here in the near future. I'm going to go ahead and get this video edited, and then I'm going to work on my sideboard for a Modern 1K that I'm playing in tomorrow. And of course, if things go relatively well in the Modern 1K, then you guys will have a tournament report coming from me tomorrow as well. With that being said, hopefully you guys did enjoy the video. Leave a like if you did. Subscribe to the channel if you are new, and I will see you guys here next time for another Magic the Gathering video.